All right, the news of the moment. Geoffrey Majiwa is out as the Nairobi mayor. Well, Njoroge Mwaura and Anne Kiguta will bring you the details of those stories and others at the top of the hour on Newsnight at 9 o'clock. But first, tonight on Newsnight, my guest of the moment is His Excellency Michael Rannerbagger, the U.S. Ambassador to Kenya. Welcome to Newsnight, and thank you for coming tonight.
It's good to be here, Beatrice. Good to be back.
I'm going to start off with getting your reflections on the situation in Kenya so far. Well, you have been in the country now through some of Kenya's political crisis and tumultuous times. Your reflections to date?
Well, what I think we're seeing is an acceleration of a process of fundamental change in Kenya. And I actually think things are moving overall in a positive direction. If you go back to the crisis, the reform agenda was created, and it was as a result of pressure from the Kenyan people, as well as the United States and Kofi Annan and others, that reform agenda was put into place. Of course, passage of the Constitution was a key element of that. So with the reform agenda, with the Constitution, clearly progress is being made. And I think there's at least the potential to address the two key issues that have bedeviled Kenya for so long: negative ethnicity and the culture of impunity. And I think what we're seeing today in Kenya is more pressure being felt from the Kenyan people, which the leaders have to listen to.
Well, you talk about there being pressure now from the Kenyan people, but the U.S. as well has been quite vocal on issues of grand corruption, for instance, and so forth and so on. We are seeing leaders now, of course, starting to take responsibility for their actions. The mayor of Nairobi today voluntarily stepping aside over allegations of corruption. Well, how do you view this situation?
Well, again, I think I don't know if they're taking responsibility or they're being forced to take responsibility. But what I see, yes, the U.S. is playing a role exerting pressure. Of course we are. We're saying we want to see change in Kenya. We want to see these issues dealt with. We want to see good governance. But at the same time, it's clear as you travel around the country, as you talk to Kenyans, it's clear that the Kenyan people have very high expectations, particularly, Beatrice, with the passage of the new Constitution. They want to see leaders held accountable. And I think this is putting pressure on the coalition government to do something. And so as these, and I give credit to the media, as these scandals are exposed, there's more pressure then to actually act and do something. And of course, people are always innocent until proven guilty. But it is, I think, in most democracies, a normal step that people step aside while investigations are carried out. And obviously, if you have pending legal proceedings, that's especially important.
Of course, there are those who are going to say the issues that are on the spot now with the three people on the spot, of course, the 1 billion shillings of the foreign ministry and several billions for the mayors, the Nairobi City Council. But we're also looking, of course, looking back since 2003. There's been millions of shillings still stashed away in foreign banks, in European and American banks. Are we likely to see now, with the change of the new constitution and new laws in place, are we likely to see America's help, for instance, in repatriating those funds? Well,
you have to be very honest about these things. I mean, some of these scandals that occurred are pretty far back in the past now. Some are relatively more recent. But what I have said and what we've said, Beatrice, and the U.S. government's been on record for a long time, we will work with the Kenyan government, with the Kenyan Anti-Corruption Commission, with all the relevant authorities to track down funds in the United States, illicit funds, if the evidence is presented to us. And I will tell you, until this moment, I have not been presented with any specific evidence that we can act upon. There was one case where there was one person who claimed to be a witness in the Anglo leasing case who was in fact interviewed, but turned out not to be a very relevant figure. So we're prepared to cooperate fully in these investigations. But of course, much of the ill-gotten gains, I think, are more in Europe perhaps than the United States. But again, it's obviously hard to tell that.
Charterhouse Bank has been in the news lately, and you have, of course, spoken about it. What is the concern there?
Well, look, Charterhouse Bank was closed some years ago, as you know, and it was closed by Kenyan authorities because there were clear violations of the Banking Act. I mean, at the time, money laundering legislation had not even been passed. But even without that, it was clear that many of the accounts were bogus, that there was money laundering taking place through the accounts, evidence that a lot of this money was coming from very bad sources, including drug trafficking and corruption and that sort of thing. And so the authorities rightly acted to close it down. And I will tell you, Beatrice, that there's voluminous evidence on this. I mean, just what I've seen is this thick. I mean, it's very detailed about specific accounts, about specific individuals, dates and times of transactions. So no one can say that they haven't seen this this evidence.
Are we saying the authorities are privy to those details?
Oh yes, they are. You know, at the same time, you know, it's a complicated case, and of course it's a lot to sift through. But there's no question that when the government acted, it acted correctly. And you've heard a number of government officials say since then that they stand by their decision. It's important that that bank not be reopened because the same people who were the directors of that bank at the time it was shut down and who were involved in these activities, they are still the people who want to be in charge of that bank. Now, accusations have been made that some of the small depositors, you know, ordinary Kenyans, were affected, but in fact their deposits are covered under the deposit insurance scheme. No one wants, obviously, normal people to be hurt, but it is the right thing to keep the bank closed.
Well, there are those who will be saying this is a Kenyan affair, this is a Kenyan issue. What is your interest?
Well, the interest is very clear. I mean, there's a general interest that we have and others have in wanting to see the culture of impunity in Kenya countered. I mean, look, the culture of impunity, along with negative ethnicity and pervasive poverty, are what led to the tremendous crisis in 2008 in this country. So if those issues are not addressed, this country will never have true stability and truly transparent democracy. And of course, we share an interest with the Kenyan people in wanting to see that. So this Charterhouse saga is only one element of this broader effort to fight the culture of impunity.
We're talking about fighting the culture of impunity. We're seeing some of Kenya's leaders being taken to task over that situation in terms of the war against corruption generally. What's your view on that? What's your take on it?
Well, again, my take is pretty straightforward. I think, you know, it was, I've cited this before, but it's important, you know, in my country, long time ago, a very famous black man, Frederick Douglass, said, you know, the leaders of any country will only do as much as they are pushed to do. And so it's always in a democracy pressure from the people that brings about change. You know, not that often is change initiated from the top. You know, people demonstrate, people make their views known. You know, in my country, that was certainly the case with the civil rights legislation. That didn't come from the top, that was generated by pressure from the bottom. And so what I see is that this pressure is growing from the Kenyan people. They are making it clear, they're saying, look, I don't care what party you are, I don't care whether you're the president or the prime minister, we want to see action. We want to see people held accountable. We have a new dawn in Kenya, we have a new constitution, and it's time to act. It's not time to do business as usual. And I will say this, I think the jury is still out on that. I mean, we've seen ministers suspended before and permanent secretaries suspended, and they come back. They come back in some new position or in a different incarnation. So we'll have to see this time if this is how real this is and how it's followed through.
But the feeling, though, is the political will is there this time around.
Well, I'm being very honest, and I will say the jury's out on that. I mean, look, political will is an interesting thing. And again, I would say the political will's there to the extent that what I think we're seeing is I think we're seeing the president and the prime minister rightly respond to the will of the people. And that's the ultimate political will, the will of the people. So yes, in that sense, the political will is there. It's certainly there on the part of the Kenyan people, that's for sure.